Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into the Guilty as Charged podcast, presented by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. My name is Steven. I am your host. Joining me, as always, are Tyler and Alex. Alex, that must have been a fun night for you, man. How you doing?
It was fun, but by the time this podcast comes out, either the greatest night of my life would have happened or the worst night of my life would have happened. So, I can't predict the future. I know we got Casper the Friendly Ghost over there in his, blue jersey. I don't know really what happened because it looks like a normal colored jersey, but it's an interesting look.
Tyler, how you doing, man?
Yeah, thank you very much. I've been going for that. I know I've been ghostly white because of quarantine, so I'm trying to get tanner, but I guess my jersey is trying to follow that ghost look as well. Hey, at least this Melvin Gordon jersey is finally worth something, so that's good. I can probably do something useful with it.
Yeah, I think if you replace the Gordon with our names, I think it might increase in value. I don't know. We've got a fun show for you guys planned today. We are recording this on Saturday, so first and foremost, hope that all the fathers out there had a great Father's Day. And hopefully the rest of you, celebrated your fathers in some kind of way. And happy Juneteenth as well. Big weekend for everybody involved. So hopefully you're having a great weekend. Hopefully you're staying cool. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the defensive tackle position room for this Chargers team. We're also going to talk a little bit about the 4 signings that the Chargers have recently done. But we're going to start off with kind of a national conversation that seems to be going on with the Chargers, and specifically about Justin Herbert. And Keenan Allen kind of started this off for a little bit, kind of started our interest at least, saying that he thinks that the Chargers are still underrated a little bit by the media. We kind of heard Joey Bosa share his excitement about the moves that the Chargers have made, specifically highlighting that the offensive line looks awesome. So Tyler, we'll start with you. Do you think the Chargers are currently being underrated, or do you think they're being properly rated by the national media pundits?
I think they're being properly rated and have been probably properly rated for most of my fandom, which is they are the surprise Super Bowl team. I don't think the last time they're probably considered like a Super Bowl contender was, or at least going into the season, was probably 2019, coming off the 2018 season where they went 12-4. It's like, let's take that next step forward, and they never did. It got worse.
Yeah,
but otherwise, like them being considered, the sneaky kind of surprise team, I think that's about right. Like, could they make the jump to a wild card? Absolutely. Are they going from 7-9 to 16-1? No, I don't think so. So I think they're being properly rated. Are some players overlooked? Potentially. Like, I do think Keenan Allen can be overlooked. I believe his thing is that he's now the 16th best wide receiver, according to whatever poll or ranking that there was. But I think they're properly rated. And I think they've always just kind of been that same sleeper, because the talent has always, give or take, been there, but they never really put it together in the end. So, but I think they're about right.
Yeah, I think they're properly rated as well. And also there's like some skepticism on the part of the national media because like every year it's like, oh man, this is my surprise Super Bowl team. Watch out for these sleepers. They're going to win the AFC West. And then they don't. So, if you keep saying it every year, it's a problem when it doesn't happen. And, ultimately the Chargers, while I think they have had very talented teams and obviously very talented players, they have won 10+ win season in the last decade. Not by any means is that a perfect metric. There have been bad coaching decisions and all that, but like until you consistently prove it to the national media, and they care when the games are going to get played, not when you sign Corey Linsley and make all these moves. Like, yes, I think that those help the team and we know that they help the team, but they're not going to know it until you actually show it on the field. And so I get where Keenan Allen is coming from, and there is part of it where they are underrated because they still are the little brother in LA a little bit. But to me, it's just like, we've seen the offseason hype for all of my lifetime and probably both of your lifetimes as well. Yeah. So to me, I think that, the Chargers are generally properly rated at the beginning of seasons.
Yeah, it's been tough, obviously, right? With the end of the Mike McCoy era and, the Anthony Lynn era, it's been tough to really consider this team contenders. I do think right now we're looking at, kind of an uphill climb, an ascending team. But I've always been a big believer that until the product on the field matches the expectations, and you can't really, be worthy of being called a contender in the offseason, right? Because everybody knows that the Kansas City Chiefs are a contender because they've proven it. Everybody knows that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are contenders right now because they've proven it. The Saints, the Packers, all these teams that, we think are title contenders, it's because they've proven it. And so I think Tyler's point to maybe some players are being underrated. Absolutely. The Good Morning Football conversations about Justin Herbert this week were so bad. Like I understand, like, maybe some people are a little worried about Justin Herbert striking like lightning in a bottle last year. But the reasoning for, that particular show choosing Joe Burrow over Justin Herbert or Tua over Justin Herbert are just dumb. Like, I mean, Justin Herbert had this amazing rookie season and, is trying to prove that he can take an MVP sized leap. Meanwhile, Joe Burrow's got to prove that he's healthy, and Tua's got to prove that he belongs in the league. So those conversations in particular where I was like, okay, like, this is absolutely something that should not be happening. This is someone that is still being underrated. And, Kyle Brandt saying that Joe Burrow has moxie because he was smoking a cigar. It's like, come on, man. That's a bunch of bull crap. Like, we're still talking about the narrative of Justin Herbert not being a leader like that. That just really irritated me yesterday when I saw that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just frustrating because you do want the team's success to match Herbert's success, or, going back in the day, the team's success to match Phillip Rivers' success, because we, regard Phillip Rivers highly, and I think most people do. He's what is he, top 5 in
most passing categories,
most passing categories, either in front of or behind Marino. Like, so to me, he's a really great quarterback, but to most people, it's like, oh, well, he was 9-7, 7-9 every year, or he choked in the playoffs, or et cetera, et cetera. So, and football, more than any other sport, I think, is a team game ultimately. So it's just like, you have to have the talent to match that, and you have to execute to be able to match your quarterback's level. So I just hope going into the future that this team isn't the paper tiger and they actually match Justin Herbert's, level that he showed last year.
God, I hope the national media's narrative is not again to look at record again for these things. We went through this last season, I thought, and it sucks that these programs, these groups, these talking heads, who your job is just to watch football, like Good Morning Football. All you have to do is watch football.
Right.
And yet, if you turn on any game for the Chargers, it's a missed Michael Badgley field goal. It's not going for it on 4th down, which isn't Herbert's call. It's, Mike Williams and Donald Parham dropping the ball in the end zone twice. Once, but each, total twice. Like, I just hate that idea that it's the record that defines the quarterback. It's not. And, it's one thing if, Herbert was a turnover machine. Like, you could pin a lot of games on Rivers, even though the game as a whole, like, yeah, sure, it's a team sport, but at the end of the game, Rivers would turn that ball over. Herbert had like 10 interceptions and like the lowest intercepted ball rate in the NFL. So it's not even like it's his fault. It's not like he's turning the ball over and forcing the team to lose. He's doing everything he can. And they're like, yeah, he's not as good as Tua. Like, I don't know. I don't like it. I hope we don't repeat this. And I'm surprised that anyone is kind of repeating the whole record thing, or just any reason to doubt Herbert, because that clearly didn't work last season. So why repeat it going into this year? I'm not really sure.
Well, I mean, and also, like, the national media, let's just get this out of the way. They don't watch games. I don't believe any of them watch games. I believe they're all frauds. I love Stephen A. Smith as a personality, but Stephen A. Smith, going into that Thursday night game in 2018, said that Hunter Henry and Derek Johnson was the matchup to watch. Right. Hunter Henry tore his ACL, and Derek Johnson wasn't on the Chiefs. So it's just like, there are moments like that from the national media. They're frauds. They don't watch games. And so to me, I take that opinion about Joe Burrow to mean absolutely jack shit.
Yeah, and it's like, are we going to sit here and pretend that Joe Burrow won a ton of games last year before he got hurt? Like, the Bengals were awful with him. So, and Tua, the Dolphins were good despite him. Like, so I don't know, like, wins and losses. Like, I understand, players are ultimately judged on Super Bowls, but when you're talking about like rookies and like breakout players and stuff like that, like, wins and losses should not matter at all. And, Justin Herbert did win more games than the both of them. He won 6 games as a starter. So it's like, can we stop that narrative? So it's an interesting conversation. Obviously, the Chargers have to prove it on the field. We've kind of talked a little bit about some of our expectations for those players, and obviously we hope that they are able to reach those. So the Chargers did sign 4 new players yesterday. They announced the signings of Willie Yarberry, Damon Lloyd. Yarberry is a defensive lineman. Damon Lloyd, a linebacker. Matt Seibert, a tight end. And Michael Bandy, the wide receiver. So these players were all out of the spring league, which I learned was a thing like literally yesterday. I had no idea that this was happening. So to me, like, I think these are training camp bodies. Like, we'll see. I mean, I'll never, flat out say that this player does not have a chance to make the roster because the Chargers have such a strong history of, so-and-so dark horse player making the roster. But it feels like these players are just training camp bodies. I don't know if both of you share that same kind of thought, but that's what it seems like to me.
Alexis. Okay, I'll go.
No, I'm not frozen.
Yeah, dude, I didn't know we were covering this topic today, so I've not watched a single bit of any.
Yeah.
I have no idea who these guys are. The only takeaway I had was Damon Lloyd sounded like Devin Lloyd, and I was like, "Oh, is that the Utah guy?"
I would have been so happy.
So that's as far as my analysis went, though.
Yeah, I think that these are all training camp bodies at the end of the day. But, with the preseason and with the training camp this year, you can't discount like the small possibility that they do make it. But, to me, it's just bodies to push the team that they have right now and some of those end of the roster guys. I wouldn't say no chance, like Tyler said, but I think it's going to be really hard. I guess the one that I could see maybe cracking it just due to position, again, I haven't watched any of these guys except, some Matt Seibert highlights that somebody posted on Twitter. Right. But, the defensive lineman Yarberry, just because I think they're a little thin at that position. And you consider like Cortez Broughton and like some of the guys that are there at the end. Maybe he can make a push, but I do ultimately believe these are training camp bodies. And, if you have the possibility of going up to 90 players anyway, they're at 86 now after these signings. You only have to cut down to 85, I think, after the first 1 or 2 weeks of the preseason. So, you may as well do it and just stack talent there, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no harm in taking a shot on these kind of players. Like I said, you never know like who's going to make a Chargers roster, and so they have the 4 spots remaining if they want to sign anybody else. I think the only takeaway that I have is it seems that with those spots, if they do decide to sign someone, that they might lean more towards an undrafted free agent kind of player instead of going out and signing a veteran that could bolster the depth. So we'll have to see. Obviously, if someone gets injured, that could change. But for now, it looks like they are focusing on kind of the diamonds in the rough area instead of a veteran presence kind of thing.
Right.
Bobby Holly's out there.
Bobby. Oh man, great time. So we're gonna move on to the focus of this episode, which is the defensive tackle position room. We kind of talked a little bit about who we expect to make the roster, but today we're going to dive a little deeper, and we're going to continue to do this with the other positions on the roster as well throughout the summer. We've got about 5 weeks until training camp starts, so we've got a lot of questions to talk about with these position groups and how they're sorted out. And I think the biggest thing for me in terms of this defensive tackle group is, can they survive an injury? Can they survive, Linval Joseph missing a few games, or Jerry Tillery missing a few games, or Justin Jones missing a few games? Because like we said on our live stream yesterday, last year they had Damian Square, who was a very reliable player. This year, I don't know if they have that kind of player on the roster. I don't know if I trust Braden Fajoko's development if he's thrust into a starting role, or Cortez Brown, or whoever they choose. So the biggest question mark to me is specifically what happens if Linval Joseph goes down, because he was the most productive player of the trio. I know he didn't have any sacks, but he was a bright spot in terms of pass rusher. He was, looking like his old self in terms of a run stopper. And he looks like he's in great shape right now, but he is over 30. You never know if those kind of players are going to get injured. So my biggest question mark is what happens to this group if Linval Joseph goes down?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question to have based on, last season where you saw defensive linemen, be it edges or tackles, start to drop, and then you saw that production come down. I think the biggest name who would probably have to step up in that position is Justin Jones, if that were to happen. And the run defense was notably worse when he was off the field as well, in addition to whenever Joseph didn't play a snap. So to me, that would be the most natural fit if that were to happen. But I mean, you would also have to have everybody step up. And to me, the guy who, we'll get into this later, but the guy who disappeared when guys dropped was Jerry Tillery. So to me, that's the thing to watch is, the conditions aren't always going to be optimal. Joey Bosa may have to miss a game. Uchenna Nwosu may have to miss a game somewhere along the line. And so to me, if you have Jerry Tillery with a fully healthy defensive line, then I think he's great. But if you don't, then I don't really know if he can, kind of carry a line by himself. Maybe that's an unfair expectation, but, they did spend a first-round pick on him. And so to me, they are looking for a bit more of that dynamic pass rusher that we saw in week 1 and week 2 of last year and less, what we saw the rest of the season. So I would say that those two guys, if Linval Joseph does get hurt, or even if he just shown some decline due to aging, those are the two guys that got to step up.
Yeah, this is pretty much in line with the question that I had for the defensive tackle or defensive line group. Even last year with the Rams, they had Sebastian Joseph Day. It was a name that no one really recognizes, but he commanded a lot of double teams, or he at least took on 2 guys. And even just in 211 run defense snaps, he had 42 solo tackles and 33 run stops. And so this is and for Joseph to do that, that's great. I do totally believe that he can do that. But like you said, as soon as he goes down, what is this team going to do? And I try not to go, like, on the one hand, I'm like, well, if he goes down, then this happens. I tried not to go too far down that list because at some point, if they're just out of talent, they're just out of talent. But, they've really committed. And this is kind of my question too, as well, adding to your question, is their move towards a more, like Linval Joseph has lost weight. So is that weight loss, the focus on speed and gap penetration, getting after the quarterback, is that a good move long-term for this team? And I guess long-term, I mean like for an entire season. Of course, like as Arjun has said, the whole goal of this defense and the Staley defense, as I guess as it should be in the NFL, is to get after the passer. And I totally get that. But, what happens when the injuries behind these players start to happen? There's not other than Nasir Adderley, there's not a single safety or edge player or linebacker on this team who started last season who either didn't suffer a season-ending injury or had some sort of injury or had some sort of off-season shoulder surgery. Everyone was hurt. So what happens after that? And if you're relying on those guys to stop the run, and that's completely fine, you have the talent from all 11 starters to do that. But as those guys start to go, and let's say Joseph starts to decline, what is your plan up front to free up Nick Neiman and Alohi Gilman at strong safety? Like, what is your plan at that point? And so, the depth certainly concerns me. Is it Fehoko? Perhaps. I'd be glad if it was. But, I mean, right now it's really thin. And there's a reason that a lot of us were trying to take either Shelvin or McGill, I believe. No, who is it? Who's the other defensive?
McNeil.
Was it McGill? McNeil. Thank you. Ali McNeil. Yeah. So there's a reason we're all trying to take one of those guys, sometime day 3 instead of like a Trey McKitty or even a Josh Palmer, because as soon as Joseph goes down, I start to worry. And then as soon as those back end players behind them start to go down, do they have the talent up front to free him up? I don't think so at all.
Yeah, it feels like the defensive line group, and this kind of includes edge rusher, but it feels like this year's version of last year where it was like, well, are the Chargers going to regret not addressing this depth at a more violent level, if you want to say? So I think, the depth on defense in general is not great. I'm okay with the depth at cornerback. I'm okay with the depth at linebacker. But the depth at defensive tackle is very concerning because, I just like, at least if, one of the linebackers get hurt, like they drafted Nick Neiman, at least if one of the safeties gets hurt, they have Mark Webb who they drafted. But, if any of these players go on the defensive tackle group go down, the next one is Braden Fajoko, like an undrafted free agent, or I guess Christian Covington, who, I mean, he's been a solid veteran, but I wouldn't trust him as much as, say, a Damian Square. So it is going to be interesting. Like Tyler said, it seems like this coaching staff is going to prefer their defensive tackles to be gap shooters and disruptors instead of, flow with the traffic and make sure you're not giving ground. So maybe that brings up more production, and maybe that allows Justin Jones and Jerry Tillery to, be more aggressive and be more natural and make more plays, which is obviously a good thing. But, we won't know that until really we see this defense in action.
And I think another kind of problem is I think a lot of people in the defensive tackle group specifically do sort of one thing well, but they're not fully kind of dimensional yet, right? Like if we talk about Justin Jones is a really good run defender, but he doesn't offer you much as a pass rusher. The opposite is true of Jerry Tillery, who offers you some as a pass rusher for sure, but he's a terrible run defender, and so that's a real problem, and why he was kind of unplayable on the edge, and some of the stuff that we saw last season. So to me, that's really going to be an issue if guys go down, because I believe Linval Joseph can do both, right? I know he didn't have a sack last year, but he had 20 pressures. He can get after the run or bring down a passer, but it's just not going to work, I think, unless you get some more development from those guys. And I think that's going to be the issue going to the season, is do you see more development from them in a way that, given that Joseph is going to his final year and getting older, that allows you to kind of move on from him potentially next season? Or do you have to re-sign him to another 1 or 2 year deal because you're still kind of seeing the same, they're about to break through, but they haven't broken through things from both Tillery and Jones?
Yeah, I've been on record. I think right now my pick for breakout player of the year for the Chargers is going to be Jerry Tillery. That doesn't mean I expect him to be a perfect player, and it doesn't mean I'm unaware of his limitations that Alex is talking about. You're looking, if you pull up the Pro Football Focus defensive grades for the Chargers, you see Jerry Tillery had 35 pressures last year, 3 sacks, 21 tackles. He only had 15 run stops, which is less than Justin Jones and barely more than Damian Square. But I just think you look at Jerry Tillery's first 8 games, and that's kind of what I've been focusing on. And like, certainly you can make an argument for other players on this team to be breakout players. I think, to me, like, when I look at someone who's a breakout player, you're looking at someone who you haven't seen like a full body of work yet. Like, that's why personally I don't choose like a Kenneth Murray as a breakout guy, because he had 100 tackles in a scheme that didn't fit him. Like, we've seen him play well. We've seen Drew Trickle play well. But for me, it's Jerry Tillery, and I totally understand the concerns. But to me, like, look at the first 8 games. The team was relatively healthy. You have basically 60% of his production came in the first 8 games. And then, after the week 9 Raiders game, it's, 1 pressure here, 1 pressure there, 0 pressures against the Patriots. And it's just not great pressure, and it's just not great production. But like I said, the first 8 games, you're seeing this player who looked like a different player from his rookie season, looked more explosive, looked like he, was on his way, and really showed flashes of dominance. And so that, for me, is why I'm choosing Jerry Tillery as the breakout player for the Chargers. Totally understand the skepticism. Totally get that he needs to improve as a run defender, because that is absolutely accurate. But I just think you're looking at someone who's shown flashes and in my opinion, is ready to take that next step.
I guess my question on the
do it.
Yeah, I guess my question on the Tillery thing too is, was it really the first 8 games last year? Because I really think it was the first 2 or 3 that he was kind of explosive, and then I think you sort of saw really a dip when both Melvin Ingram and Justin Jones went down. And you talk about 60% of his production came in those first 8 games, but I would imagine that probably 80% of that 60% of his production came in those first 2 or 3 games.
His best game was week 8 against Denver. He had 6 pressures, 1 sack, 2 hits, 3 hurries. If you want me to do the whole rundown, I can. He had 3 total pressures in week 1 with 1 sack, 1 hurry, 1 hit. Week 2, he had 5 pressures, 3 hits, 2 hurries. Week 3 was basically goose egg. Week 4, he had 1 pressure, 0 sacks, 1 hit. Week 5 against the Saints, 2 pressures, 0 sacks, 0 hits, 2 hurries. Week 7 against the Jacksonville Jaguars, he had 4 pressures, 0 sacks, 0 hits, 4 hurries. Week 8, like I said, 6 total pressures, 1 sack, 2 hits, 3 hurries. And then week 9 against the Raiders, he had 3 total pressures, 1 sack, 0 hits, 2 hurries. So,
I mean, okay, so I'm willing to say, like, hey, you got 4 good games in there, I think for sure, like, out of those 8 or 9. But, like, okay, you got 3 pressures in the Raiders game, and he had the sack and Derek Carr, at the end of that first half. But, that also balances out with all the things that he did poorly in that game on the edge. And that's not totally fair to him because, again, he was moving to the edge that game. I just think he kind of showed up and disappeared at times, depending on how the flow of the game was going. And if you really want him to be a, game-changing pass rusher, I think that he just has to be more, not just talking about run defense, but more consistent all around, right? Like if you're kind of bouncing around between, 4 pressures one game, 0 pressures the next, I think that's really where you get into trouble with Tillery.
I guess my question then would be, looking at the stats, looking at the games, whatever, like this is a guy who definitely improved from week 17 of 2019 to week 1 of 2020, despite having no preseason games, barely any practice, no true offseason. He did improve. So making that leap, totally understandable. My question for, I guess, Steven or Alex, if you watched it, I know Steven did a whole breakdown. What then was the reason for his hot start followed by kind of sharp-ish decline? Was it just the move? Was it lack of players around him? Was it conditioning? All of the above? Like, what would you say was maybe the main reason? And then is that something that would get fixed this year? Or like, is that something that can be avoided this year?
Yeah, I think it's the combination of all the things. Like Alex points out, him being on the edge, specifically against the Raiders. And I think when you're looking at Jerry Tillery, he's not someone that should be on the edge on the front side of plays, which is what he was doing when he was playing defensive. And, Gus Bradley called it the big end. And I understand, like, you want to experiment a little bit with Jerry Tillery as an edge rusher. And I know, like, Gavino Boys and others think that maybe that's, like, where he's best suited as an edge rusher. If they were more in a 4-3 scheme, I could see that. But to me, this whole focus of, getting players in the right spots, like, to me, you put Jerry Tillery at, a 5 technique or a 3-eye, and you kind of let him wreak havoc. And, we saw flashes of it last year when he was a rookie, against the Bears, right? Like, he had a couple really good plays on the backside, shooting through the gap and chasing down a runner. I think that's what you're getting with Jerry Tillery. I think, he's one of the biggest players this coaching staff didn't really know how to use, and I would have totally understood if they had a full offseason, like, experimenting more with him at the edge. But frankly, they just didn't have any other options, right? Like, Bosa goes down, Ingram goes down, Umosu was hurt. And there was a time when all 3 of them were out at the same time. And so it was, all right, well, we don't have anything else. Let's put Jerry Tillery out there. So I think it was just he probably did get worn down a little bit condition-wise, and I just think it wasn't really a good fit with him. So I totally understand. I think Alex is right. I think there are concerns about consistency. But again, like when I'm picking a breakout player, like, I want to see someone who's shows flashes, shows dominance at sometimes, and is able to maybe take that step. And if he doesn't pan out, then this is it for him. This is a make or break season for him. And if he doesn't pan out, and if Linval is older, then this team's defensive tackle class is in trouble. They got to go attack that aggressively next year. It's going to be just like the offensive line this year. So I'm totally aware of what Alex is saying. I think those are all fair criticisms. I just personally think that the flashes, show me a future breakout player.
I would also just say, the flashes and the athleticism that you do see are great. And I also think it's a matter of him becoming more disciplined too. Because, he did commit 8 penalties last year.
Yep.
3 in a 2-game stretch against the Bills and the Patriots that really cost the Chargers, not so much against the Patriots because they lost by 45 points, but it did cost the Chargers against the Bills, certainly in a game that was decided by 10 points. So to me, like, when guys go down around you, what are you, I guess, at that point? Is he the same player or the same player that we saw in weeks 1 and 2? Or, does he kind of decline, and not just decline, but get into his own head about what's going on in the field around him? Like, because to me, that was sort of the issue too. Not just like, oh, he's not getting sacks or pressures, but he looked kind of rattled, I guess is the term I would use, just out there. And I think you saw that in the later half of the season. But obviously, hopefully, it is healthy. But I do think even if the line isn't healthy and you have guys that have to miss games, like, I just think he can't be that undisciplined and cost the teams like he did in the Buffalo game.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah, I think I remember the roughing the passer penalty he had on Josh Allen, and it was like 2 seconds after he had thrown the ball already. It was just kind of like, what are you doing? What are you seeing here? So that absolutely is a fair criticism as well.
Right. I mean, it was more than 2 seconds. That was like 5 Mississippis. I was counting it. And it seemed like more.
All right.
Oh,
so,
man.
Yeah, good times ahead. So, obviously, we're rooting for this group to put it together. Alex, any chance you see like the Justin Jones breakout as a passer, or what do you because you've been the biggest fan of him of the three of us. So, what do you make of Jones in year 4?
I don't know if he will really break out as a pass rusher. I think if he's used more that way, you can get a little bit more production there. To me, it's also just like an expectations thing with him because, like, to me, Tillery has greater potential, like as a pass rusher, as an overall game wrecker. So to me, like, him not reaching that potential is a bit more, disturbing at times. Versus Justin Jones, I think right now, maybe he ends up being the long-term replacement for Linval Joseph. Maybe he doesn't. But I think it's just kind of stopping the run. And, like, that run defense really went downhill last year when he wasn't there. They held Mixon to, nothing that first week. They held Clyde Edwards-Helaire up big time in week 2. Then he goes down and they, start to have a string of bad games. And, it didn't get too much better when he came back in fairness. But I think that just him being there is as a body, I think is more important because he's a guy that, based on like what we would see on PFF is a 60, 70 graded, defensive tackle, and he can tackle well, doesn't really miss very often. So to me, I think he's just really a physical force to have there. I don't know if he's ever going to break out into a pass rusher in the way that Linval Joseph is, but I think just having him on the field, hopefully for all of 2021, that's really what I think it should be. And I think with Brandon Staley as a defensive coordinator, I think he can draw, maybe Joey Bosa gets double teamed and that allows, Justin Jones to get a one-on-one that he really likes or something like that. Or maybe he just gets, a free sack or something because of Brandon Staley's ingenuity.
Are we defining breakout for him as in like he becomes a better pass rusher, or because to me, like you say, he's like better against the run, and that might be his role, especially if Joseph goes down. Okay, so is Justin Jones one of those guys that's losing weight this offseason, or is it just Joseph?
And Jones has lost as well.
Okay, because I think I said in a recent previous episode when we talked about some of these guys that, for me, in the one game that I watched of Justin Jones, granted just one game against the Raiders, he was either not big and strong enough to hold up, or he was just not quite fast enough either. So it seems like they're leaning towards that faster side, which is great. That's awesome. And I do think leaning towards that is really great for him. And so sure, he could break out as a pass rusher, but then, or is he receding then as a run defender? I don't know. I just have a lot of questions about them being too committed to one thing, which is an important thing, but not the other. So like, could he break out as a pass rusher? Yeah, I think so. And like you said, staying consistent and healthy for 17 games would be awesome. It'd also be the first time he's healthy for 17 games because they've never played a 17-game schedule. But and I just stupid. I it's so dumb. Forget it. Alex,
Oh,
move
man.
on. Forget it.
But to your point, like I think a breakout season for Justin Jones, like I think it's to a lesser scale of a pass rusher than I would assume Jerry Tillery becomes. Justin Jones had 14 total pressures last year. He only had 300 pass reps. So for him, if he could get up to like 25 pressure, and he had one sack last year, so maybe like 3 or 4. Like I think that would be consistent of a breakout as a pass. And we did hear last offseason, Gus Bradley and Gift Smith and those guys were saying that, they liked what he was doing as a pass rusher. Felt like he could take that next step. Unfortunately, it didn't really come to fruition. But, getting back to Alex's point, CFF grade, he's their third highest graded run defender with 79.2. That's a really, really good grade for, your presumably third defensive tackle. He was only trailing Joey Bosa and Denzel Perryman in run defense grade on PFF.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point to bring up. I didn't know it was 79 because I haven't had access to PFF because they raised their prices.
We share the same thing.
Oh, I don't know. I've tried logging into that thing and it doesn't allow me to view it. I don't know. I gave up on it. I just see when PFF posts the numbers. So I didn't know if it was 79, but he had been that way for a couple seasons, just consistently being, a 70 graded player on PFF. Maybe that doesn't mean a lot of things because, fuck PFF and all that. But to me, that's just, he was a standard good player, doesn't miss tackles. I don't think he'll ever develop into the pass rusher that Jerry Tillery can become. But I think if he at least starts to get the ball rolling on getting pressures like Linval Joseph does, that to me would be not a breakout season, but it would be a successful 2021 season.
The starting group here has a pass rush productivity of 4.4, 3.3, and 2.6. That's great. For reference, Emeka Egbule's pass rush productivity is 6.8. So that's the three we're dealing with here.
Oh man, that's no fun. I know that Brandon Thorne, he's got his own metric for the company that he works with, and he recently graded the top 50 defensive tackles in terms of pass rush efficiency, and I think Tillery was like 47. So not great, and absolutely aware of those limitations, like I've said. But I do think the flashes we'll have to see. I'm going to do another film breakdown on Tillery this week once I get some time to watch some film of his. So stay tuned for that. Alex, what were you going to say?
I just want to ask one more question, just because we do know Gift Smith is coming back, right? We know Jay Rogers is here, in addition to Brandon Staley and Ronaldo Hill. How do we feel about the defensive line coaching staff in comparison to last year? Gift Smith is still here, but how do we feel about that group as a whole? Because I sort of feel okay with it, but I'm not jumping up and down exactly. But what do you guys think?
So Daniel Popper pointed out that Jay Rogers is working with the edge rushers, Joey Bosa, Bosu, all those guys. And Gift Smith is doing the defensive tackles. So they have kind of separated them, which is kind of interesting because Gift Smith pretty much stayed on the staff because of his relationship with Joey Bosa, specifically. So I don't know, man. Like Jay Rogers, it's kind of a wait and see approach, obviously, but Jay Rogers has a fantastic reputation for getting the most out of his pass rushers, and you can throw Brandon Staley in there as well, right? So I think between the three of them, I feel very confident in his defensive line coaching staff personally. And I think if this coaching staff is able to get the most out of Tillery, get Nwosu to be, carry his efficiency over to a full season, I think the defensive line could be in hands. Obviously, it depends on health and depth and stuff like that. But in terms of the coaching staff on the defensive line front, I'm very confident.
Yeah, I feel pretty confident about it as well. Just looking at, the history of the guys and, Gift Smith, I think some things are hit or miss. Like Jerry Tillery hasn't quite had that breakout season yet. But then it's no longer his problem. Now it's Jay Rogers' problem. And I do like that they have, if that's how they're parsing it out, where it's Giff Smith has the edge guys, and then Jay Rogers has the interior guys. I think that's great because then Staley's the third. Oh,
Giff is doing defensive tackles. Jay Rogers is doing edge rushers. Sorry if I misspoke there earlier, but Jay Rogers has the edge. Giff has the interior.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you sure? That's
what Daniel Popper said, man. In his article at The Athletic, he said that specifically. I remember him saying that Joey Bosa is working with Jay Rogers and not usually with not with Giff Smith like he has been in the past. And that seems to be, they can mix it up, right? Like it's not that much different,
sure.
Coaching edge rushers versus defensive tackles, and maybe they rotate it. I imagine they will. But Daniel Popper did say in this mini camp when Bosa was there, he was working with Jay Rogers.
Well, he's technically their run game coordinator too, right? So I suppose that extension of the run support was good, but Giff Smith taking on the defensive tackles, like I speak highly of Smith for what he's done with someone like Bosa or Moshu or the consistency with Ingram, but I'm not really sure if I'm a fan of his at the defensive tackle group. But either way, even if you have two different guys, like I'll take the edge rushers, you take the interior guys, and then Staley's overseeing the whole scheme. I think that's good for the team because there's so much learning that has to be done with this front seven or the front, I guess 3 and 2. But I don't know if I like that combination.
And I think in general, there's going to have to be some collaboration. It can't be completely separate anyway, because if bodies do start to drop and, you have to start having uncomfortable conversations like, hey, do we start Chris Rumpf this week or do we start Jerry Tillery? Which hopefully doesn't happen. But as bodies drop and, you got to figure stuff out, there has to be collaboration. And Jay Rogers being run game coordinator specifically for a group that's struggled against the run, that's going to be important too. So I really don't think there's any way that they're not kind of both working on both units. But, I do think they will obviously specialize a bit like Popper said.
Yeah, and when it comes to on the practice field, they're doing the same drills. There's not going to be much difference. You're attacking the pass rush cone or whatever the case may be. You're all doing the same things. It's just in the meeting room, who's leading the meeting room and who's breaking down the film with them. And I assume, like Alex said, there is going to be some collaboration there. I can't imagine Brandon Staley is going to be uninvolved with this group either, because that's how he made his rise up as an outside linebackers coach, technically. So that coaching staff, I think, is going to be fine. And like I said, I think there is going to be collaboration between the two. Some days it'll be Rogers with the edge rushers. Other days it'll be Giff Smith. And Joey Bosa loves Giff, right? So I can't imagine that Giff is never going to work with him again.
Both the edges and the tackles will both play Kahoot. We know that. So
they will play Kahoot. All right, guys. Any other thoughts on the defensive tackle room before we wrap up today's show?
I'm not frozen.
Okay. Just an awkward silence there waiting for Alex. Tyler, any thoughts on the defensive tackle room?
No, I'm happy to be over the defensive tackle group because this is the group I know the least about. So happy to move on from them and go to somewhere else.
That's why I figured we'd start with them. Be able to get it out of the way quicker. But yeah, we're gonna be able to do this with several of the position groups. Like I said, for the next couple of weeks as a preparation for training camp. Can't wait for that to start up in about 5 weeks or so. Hopefully getting some other interviews as well. I've been emailing back and forth with Jeff Duncan of The Athletic, who is the author of the Peyton and Breeze book, which I've been reading. So hopefully that is coming in the next couple of weeks. And as always, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Please leave us a rating or a review. Enjoy Tyler's blue screen with our logos across of Melvin Gordon's jersey. And we will see you guys next time.